There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
There's a term out there that's been floating around for close to 2 centuries, and this term is often used to describe evolution by natural selection. Or to be more exact, it's used to explain, in shorthand, why nature selects some organisms over others. The phrase I'm talking about is survival of the fittest. We've all heard it, and we've even talked about this on a past episode of the show. The phrase evokes all sorts of images, but there's a problem with it. Shorthand in science can lead to misconceptions. So where did it come from? Who first put those 4 words together? Was it Charles Darwin? No. I asked Stephanie Keep this. Longtime listeners of the show will remember who Stephanie is, but for those who don't...
I am Stephanie Keep. And I guess I'm now considered an expert in evolution education.
So the phrase, survival of the fittest, I asked Stephanie where it came from.
It was Herbert Spencer who wrote a book in 1864 called Principles of Biology, and he did write it after reading on the origin of species. He was sort of using it as his own shorthand for Darwin's ideas, but it was not originally Darwin.
Herbert Spencer was a philosopher, a biologist, and a sociologist who lived during the time of Darwin. He had his own thoughts about the evolutionary process, which he drafted in an essay titled Progress, Its Law and Cause in 1857. And this essay was later expanded into a book. It was that book which contained the infamous phrase.
I think that it's such an evocative phrase, and it's such wonderful shorthand that people want to use it, but then they don't know what it means when they're saying it.
So let's look at it a bit more closely. What does it mean to be fit? Does it mean being faster and stronger than your neighbor? Does the stronger organism win the race? And what race are we talking about anyway? Is there a race? It's the wrong question, actually. Strip away that idea of what it means to be fit, as well as the laundry list of traits and abilities that you might come up with. Forget the organism as a whole, actually. It can all be boiled down to their genes.
Well, more specifically, it's all about passing on those genes. So you're considered fit in an evolutionary sense if you meet 3 requirements. The 3 requirements being you have to find a mate. So you have to attract a mate, you have to find a mate, and you have to have viable offspring with said mate.
Sex is never far behind.
You know, you have to survive long enough to find a mate, you have to reproduce successfully, and you have to have offspring that, go on and live their own lives. And if you do that, you are considered fit.
And as long as the process is repeatable, but with the genes themselves, they don't care about anything at all. They're just a machine built for replication.
Exactly. So you've got the survival aspect of it. You have to live long enough to find a mate. You have to actually find that mate, and you have to reproduce successfully. And your genes are just along for the ride, as far as the genes themselves are concerned. It's the organism. And in that sense, you don't have to be anything. You just have to be good enough. Yeah, it's the survival of the good enoughs.
Yes, the good enoughs. I love that. You don't have to be quote-unquote better than everyone else. And what does better even mean anyway? It could mean a bit faster, smaller, or more camouflaged. It all depends on the environment. You just need to be good enough to survive long enough to reproduce in the environment you find yourself in. And that's the funny thing about environments. They are always changing. You might be good enough in the environment you're in today, but tomorrow could be an entirely different story. Some environments can be pretty horrific, relatively speaking, or not. They can also be pretty peaceful, until you add another variable into the mix, like, say, smog.
But this also gets into another couple of misconceptions, which is the idea that only dark moths will survive, if we go to the famous like peppered moth example.
In the mid-19th century, the area between London and Manchester was populated by moths. Before the Industrial Revolution, the lighter white-bodied peppered moths were more predominant. There were black-bodied moths, but their numbers were a lot smaller. A lot. The reason for that being that they were much easier to spawn on the lichen-covered trees. They made for pretty easy prey. Now, going back to the good enoughs, there were some of those black moths who managed to survive, so the population never died out. And then came the Industrial Revolution. With any good revolution, there's change. And in this case, that change introduced a new variable into the environment. That variable being soot produced from coal. Lots of it. So much so that it killed the light-colored lichens on the trees. And do that and the trees become darker. A darker tree means it's easier to see those light white-bodied moths resting for a few minutes on its bark. Those few minutes are all it takes for a passing bird to spot lunch. Remember those black-bodied moths that made up the smaller percentage of the moth population? Guess whose numbers grew? Now that's because they did a much better job of blending in. Blending in meant that they escaped predation long enough to reproduce. More numbers, more chances to reproduce, and the population increases, while the whiter moths saw their numbers dwindle. Now those darker moths are not more fit. They just, by happy circumstance, happen to have a trait that gave them an advantage when the environment around them changed. They were always darker, and it became the favored variation. It's natural selection in action. Now remember I mentioned horrific environments? Well, take an African savanna. There's nothing particularly horrifying about the beauty of a savanna, unless you're a gazelle and there happens to be a cheetah crouched behind a nearby clump of tall grass.
If you're a cheetah, then yeah, being like super strong, super fast, with super scary claws, that makes you very fit. Good job, cheetah.
When faced with a cheetah, gazelles don't have much to fight with. It's like bringing a gun to a knife fight. What gazelles do have, though, is speed. And over time, those cheetahs who are capable of catching up to their food source had offspring who also enjoyed the traits that led to a speedier race. And, well, we've all seen the videos. Like I said, horrific. But it's not all scary. The cheetahs don't always win the race. If they did, then we'd have no more gazelles to watch. Those gazelles which are faster have offspring that exhibit the traits which enable them to be faster. And the race goes on. Let's look at a more peaceful example. Well, peaceful in a sense that it doesn't involve claws, blood, and the ripping of flesh.
One of my favorite videos ever, and I'm sure that a lot of your listeners have seen it, it's this amazing video of a camouflaged octopus. And you're sort of zooming in, and there's like a piece of coral and sort of the sea-floor, and you don't see anything. And then all of a sudden you're like, why am I watching this video of like nothing?
And then
a flippin' octopus comes out. It was perfectly blended in. So, who's to say what's better, sharp claws and running fast, or being able to make yourself completely invisible? So all of these things play into this one overall concept of fitness. So fitness isn't one-dimensional, and it's not just strong, fast, fierce. It's all of these different things put together. And so as you look at organisms, and it truly is fun, like think about it, what are the adaptations that are contributing to this organism's fitness?
it is fun when you step back and ask yourself, what traits have enabled this organism to survive and successfully reproduce? And how is it that its offspring survived? And then you step back even further and realize that all of these beautiful creatures compete for many of the same resources in whatever environment they find themselves in. Now, when you look at it like that, in all of its complications and interactions, it is an amazing world. There are a lot of chipmunks in the woods behind my house, and I watch them run about, collect nuts, and nervously pause now and then to look for predators, pretty much every second of the entire day. Now, on top of that, they are also looking for a mate. And really, what chipmunk has time for that, right? And yet, they do. And, in some cases, it doesn't even have to be a mate of the same species. Now, hear me out. I'm not talking about chipmunks mating with skunks. I'm talking about another organism we share this planet with who doesn't enjoy our ability to walk around looking for someone's hand to hold. I'm talking about plants. Now, if there's a cute tree across the field, how do they meet and reproduce? They need help. And to do so, they need to attract pollinators.
Another good one that I talk about in the blog is the corpse flower, which apparently that smell is alluring. It attracts this very particular pollinator that it has.
That's attracted to what? Decaying flesh?
Yeah, and it's like disgusting to us, but it's apparently delicious.
Okay, so we're back to the horrific.
And then you get into sexual selection, of course, too. You know, peacock tails and huge, disgustingly fat walruses. And I mean, it's all awesome. Birds of paradise and those dances that they do. That's their part. That's this part of fitness, attracting the mate. And then successfully reproducing, there's great examples here too. And a lot of this can be behavioral, you know, birds that sit on the eggs and wait for them to hatch. Or you can, you know, there's different strategies, of course. There's fish that spawn thousands upon thousands at once and kind of figure the odds are with me, some of them are going to survive. There's a frog that actually burps out its young. They gestate in its throat.
What a way to start one's day. The thing is, if you want to strip away the beauty, the struggles, and those little moments of magic, it's all a probability matrix. It comes down to numbers, variables, and equations. And I have to admit, math was never one of my strong subjects.
It's really just a probability. So are you more or less likely than another individual in your population to be successful?
And don't we all want to be successful? When you think about it, the fact that you are able to hear me right now is because you come from a long line of success stories, a long line of individuals who were good enough to pass their genes on to the next generation, a long line which stretches back billions of years. Congratulations. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Evolution Talk. I'm Rick Coast, and you can find show notes and source material used for this episode at evolutiontalk.com. I hope your week is going well, and until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.